All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tech Tuesday. My name's Tom Levine. I'm a Cornerstone's Commissions and Technical Specialist. And today we're going to be covering some of the Excel basics. This is really just for people who are getting started with Excel. We're going to go into a little bit of how to interact with the cells themselves, the different basic menu options that you're going to need to work through it. And if there's time, we're also going to get into detail about some formula work. So hopefully we'll get to that as well. Before we get started, though, I did want to mention that there's a handout attached to today's presentation. This is the Excel file that I'm going to use along with my general formula notes. I'd highly recommend downloading the file, even if you don't want to follow along, just because I have those notes attached. So please feel free to use that. One other note is that I'm working in Excel 2019. Excel 2019 is the version that I personally recommend, but if you're using Office 365 or an earlier version of Office, that's fine as well. A lot of what I'm going to do today is pretty applicable to any version of Excel and any version of the Office suite. It just might look a little bit different in the menu, and you may have some other minor differences as well, such as loading times and just how quickly data is going to load for you. Before we get deeper into it, I'm going to go ahead and mention just a few things that our marketing department wants me to say. First off, general housekeeping. If you've got some questions, please go ahead and ask away. I'm here as a resource. Please type it into the question box in your webinar viewer. And if you don't see that, that's fine as well. We'll answer questions at the end of the presentation as well as via email. If you don't feel like putting it out there for everyone to see, you can reach out to me at 513-487-5390, or you can email me at tlevine@crnstone.com. Just make sure to put Tech Tuesday in your subject line. Additionally, I'll be putting this slide up at the end of the presentation, so don't worry about writing anything down right now. Also, you can earn up to $7,000 in cash with Cornerstone's Cash Incentive Program. You earn more when you sell more, and for all group, individual, and new business sales between January 1st and of this year and December 31st of this year, you're going to earn points that bring you closer to that $7,000 cash prize. There is more information on that on our website as well, and I'm just going to type the URL into our chat. It's www.crnstone.com/cash incentive program. Additionally, I'd recommend looking into our Autopilot program. Autopilot is our ASP program if you've been with us for a while, and we have several different options for you. We've got Autopilot, our client referral program. We've got Parachute, which is succession planning, Copilot, which is just a service agreement, and Flight Plan for retirement assistance. If you want to know more about that as well, the URL is up on the screen, but you can find that on our website as well under What We Offer and Agency Services Program. So before we get into questions, let's actually do the presentation. This is the sample workbook that is attached to this file. And if you don't want to follow along, that's fine as well. But we're going to start with some basic cell manipulation. And this is really the bread and butter of how to interact with Excel. We are in the working file on this sample workbook, and I started with this relationship cell selected. I'm going to be referring to cells by their names. This one is in column E and in row 2. So this is cell E2. You can select different cells, however, by just clicking on them once, and you can select individual cells that way. Additionally, you can select one cell and then drag your cursor. And that actually selects a range of cells. You can do that to delete large chunks of data by highlighting them and hitting delete on your keyboard. I'm going to Control Z out of that, so we have that as reference. But if you want to edit the body of a cell, you're going to need to just click on the cell, and then click on this little bar up here under the menu. This bar is called the formula bar, and what it really is just the exact contents of what's actually in that cell. I mentioned it a little bit at the start, but Excel has something called formulas, and you can also put text in here. It can be numbers. There are a lot of different things that you can put into a cell. So this formula bar just shows you exactly what's actually in it, not how those contents of the cell are displayed. What I mean by that is if I look on this DOB column, I have that 4/13/1969 in cell H2. But if I look at cell H14, it actually just has a string of numbers. Now, this dates a little bit weird. If I highlight the entire cell or entire column, and then go into my Home tab and change the format of that to short date, then those solid numbers that were in those cells disappear. I actually just see a date listed. But I'm just going to scroll down through these, show you what I mean. It does not seem to want to show anymore. That is interesting. Let me try that again. Here it is, the cell. Cell H14 is the one we're going to reference here. So I move this to short date, click back on cell H14. We have a solid date again. If I click on that, remove 10, automatically goes to 2020. But then if I change it back to general, I actually have a different number listed. And right now it's 44044. I'm just going to Control Z through that to get back to the 8/1/2010 date, and then go to general again. And as you can see, that number has changed. That's sort of why I mentioned this whole formula bar in the first place. A lot of Excel's cells display information, but that's not necessarily what's actually in there. Because we formatted this as a date earlier and click on it, it displays information, but that's not actually what's in that cell, realistically. That's one of the things that makes interacting with Excel a little bit difficult. Dates are a little bit strange as well, but that's for the next presentation. For now, we're going to focus more on just how to scroll through it and why you need to be aware of that. I'm going to go ahead and select a range of cells now and just talk about how to briefly go through a range of cells that you have selected. If I hit Enter on the keyboard, the selected cell goes down in the row. If I hit Tab on the keyboard, the cell that I have selected goes across the range of selected cells. This also works if I just tab and enter through cells that are already typed without selecting anything, if you're one of the keyboard people like I am. Additionally, to type into a cell, you don't necessarily have to click on this function bar. You just click, type away. But if you have the cell selected and just hit backspace on it, deletes everything that's in there. If I wanted to edit this string of text itself, I have to click on part of the formula bar and then backspace through. There are some other things you can do with cells as well. I'm just going to fill this with some information real quick, just as a sample, and then I'm going to right-click on it. Right-click is kind of what I recommend if you're stuck and don't really know what to do with something, because right-clicking on a cell gives you a lot of different options. Up here, there's a little short menu. I can change the font size from it with these two little buttons here, or I could change the font itself with the drop-down along with the font size. I can also change formatting of these numbers by clicking on either the accounting format, clicking on the drop-down there, and then clicking on more accounting formats. Or I could jump it to a percentage, display it as commas, And I can merge and center cells as well, although we'll be getting more into that in our next webinar. I can also make text bold, italic, center it, highlight it, and even select the highlight color. Change the text color. Add cell borders, however I wish. I could do full borders, partial borders, anything from this drop-down menu, really. And if I were entering numbers into here, I could move where the decimal point is displaying as well. What I mean by that is if I click on this 4.5 entry here, and I just sort of extend that, oh, sorry, that is another way to do it. But if I just sort of move with these, I can display how far into the decimal I want to show that number. And then there's a format painter here as well, which just applies that format to the range that was in that original cell to the range of cells you highlight. I'm going to reset this now to a blank cell with black text before I get into some of the other menu options. If I right click, it also opens up this drop-down menu here, and that's actually extremely useful as well. I can cut and copy from this menu other than just using the Control-C and Control-X shortcuts for that. I can use Smart Lookup, which just searches for the contents of the cell on the web. I can use Insert to insert a cell and shift cells to the right, down the entire row or the entire column. And those are with reference to the cell that's selected. So if I right click and hit delete on this and shift cells left, the cells to the right of the cell I just deleted move left. If I were to right click, go to insert, and then say an entire row, then it inserts that entire row on the row I have selected and moves the rest of that information, including what was on that row, down one. The same thing happens if I right click a cell, hit delete, and then shift cells up, or right click, delete, and then entire row. It shifts that entire row of data that was below that row that I just deleted up one. In addition, I can use quick analysis tools, which are kind of advanced. You don't really necessarily need to know it, and apply filters through that entire selection as well. I'm going to select this first name column right now and go to filter. And let's say I wanted to filter by the selected cell's value. That automatically applies a filter to the column that I have selected and applies that filter for the contents of the cell that I had selected. In this case, it selected John. And then if I hit Control-Z to undo, I can get out of that. Alternatively, if I had that filter applied as well, so we're going to filter by value again, and then I wanted to do that a different way, I could click on that little filter dropdown from the very top column and hit select all. And that just kind of undoes the filter, while leaving all of your clickable filter options up here if you're a clicker versus actual keyboard filter user. In addition to that, we can quickly clear the contents of a cell. And we can even sort entire rows by just right-clicking, hitting sort, and then say, put selected, let's say cell color on top. Let's go ahead and just highlight a few different colors here and do that again so you can get a better view of it. If I right-click now, sort, and put selected cell color on top, it now moved all of the cells or columns, or sorry, it moved all of the rows with that color on them to the top. So I think that's another useful little shortcut. I'm going to go ahead and undo my filter. And then we'll right click and get into the formatting of cells and comments. Comments are actually really useful if you're using Excel sheets across an organization. You can select a cell, right-click it, and hit Insert Comment, and you'll get a little bubble up here. You can type whatever you want into this bubble. I'm going to type, for instance, this is a sample comment. Hit Enter. And if you hit Enter here, it actually doesn't exit the comment, it just adds spaces. So then I click off of the cell, and the comment disappears. But you can still see this little red nook in the corner. Not sure if everyone will be able to see that because of Zoom, but I'm gonna zoom in on it real quick for you. As you can see, it has this little red flag. I'm gonna circle it as well, right up here. And that means that there's a comment on the cell. Let me just clear that out. And then zoom back out to 100%. I'm doing that by clicking on the zoom options on the bottom right-hand side of Excel. You can also open up the zoom options by just clicking on the percent magnification and then selecting from a quick option there. It'll zoom in on the cell you have selected. Anyway, if I wanted to look at the comment, I could just scroll over it, or I could select the cell. But as you can see, if I try to get to that comment, I can't actually edit it that way. In order to edit it, I have to right-click on the cell that has the comment and hit Edit Comment. So if I then delete the word comment from that, click off of the cell, click back to it, that's now deleted. I can also just delete the comment directly by hitting the delete comment. And if I wanted to, I'm just going to add another comment in here for a sample. I could show and hide comments by just right-clicking on a cell and hitting hide. If I don't like it popped up. If you scroll back over it, though, it'll pop up again. And then I can just right-click on a cell and hit delete comment. Sorry about that. If I wanted to delete a comment. Additionally, you can do a lot of these options as well by interacting with some basics in the Excel menu. The way you would do that is by first highlighting the cell and then using this menu up here. It's actually called the ribbon, but a lot of people just call it the menu to actually interact with some formatting of the cell. We're going to be getting really, really in-depth with this menu up top here in our next webinar as well. So I'm just going to show you some of the basics today. You can do some of the font options that I mentioned real quick from the Home tab, along with some alignment adjustments for the numbers from the alignment section. You can merge and center cells as well by just highlighting them and clicking merge and center. Now, what it'll do when you do that, and I'm going to show you by just merging and then unmerging these cells, is it'll keep the leftmost uppermost column number that you have selected. So actually, let's do a few cells here to show you what I mean. Remember this number up here in the upper left-hand corner. I'm going to go ahead. I almost did it for merge and center, sorry. I'm going to select the cells, hit merge and center, and it merges the cells to only keep the upper left value and discards the others. So now I have one giant cell, in the middle of my spreadsheet, just that number in it. To unmerge and center cells, I just select the cell that's merged and hit the merge and center option again, and it unmerges them. As you can see, however, we lost all of that data that was underneath it. So be careful when you're merging things. We also have the option to wrap text. And what that does is if I narrow this column and then sort of extend this all the way down, just to show you, it wraps whatever's in that cell around if there's space, so you can see all of it. I can also just quickly double click on the column or row, letter or number to extend that range all the way out for whatever's filling that box. And I'd recommend just playing around with these controls a little bit. It's a lot easier to understand a lot of this stuff if you're just following along with it. Additionally, you can change the cell's formatting by clicking up in here. And you can even apply formatting conditions through styles. You can also interact with cells with this menu up here in the home screen. It's titled Cells. And you can also do some basic editing things up here as well. A lot of users actually apply filters by highlighting that top row, hitting Sort and Filter, and then hitting Filter to actually filter through things. You can also apply those sort options, like what I had selected before, by clicking on a cell, going to Sort and Filter, and hitting Custom Sort. It automatically highlights the full range of data if you just have one selected, and you can sort all of it. For instance, in this case, let's sort it by last name. So all I did was I clicked a cell, Sort and Filter, Custom Sort, and then I selected it. You can even add levels to this sort by just clicking the Add Level button. You can delete levels by hitting the Delete Level button. If you want to control specific ones that you're deleting, I just set a lot of these in here as a sample. You just click on the one you want and hit Delete Level, and it removes it. When you sort like this, it sorts by the top option first, then the next one, then the next one. So let's say you wanted to sort it by last name, then by the rate per payment. I just hit last, then rate per payment. And then if I wanted to get more specific about it, I could change the order of that sort from A to Z to Z to A, and from, let's say, largest to smallest for the rate. And then if I hit OK, now everything is sorted by the name alphabetically, Z to A. So last name, last letter of the alphabet first, and then all the way down. So you can see that. And then if I just scroll down through this, it also, as you can see, has those rates of payment sorted. To undo different sorts like that, you can just Control Z to undo it. Or you can go back into the filter and sort options and just reapply the sort. I'm going to do it by line now, just to make sure everything's back in order. You can also search the entire document using Find and Select. And if I just hit Find, then I can find contents of cells. Let's type Adkin and hit Enter. Now we have Adkin. If I wanted to, say, find and replace all the cells that said Adkin and make them just say AAAAA, and then hit Replace, it'll replace all of the cells and show through them individually. But if I hit Replace All, it'll replace every single cell that said Adkin with AAAAA in the entire sheet because I have the entire sheet selected. I'm going to just hit Control Z a few times after closing this to undo what I had done. Additionally, if I go back into just Control F to back open up Find and Replace and hit Find All, it opens up all of the options, shows you exactly where it is in this cell option down here, and then tells you the value of the cell. So that's another way to just quickly sort through your document. We're also going to go through some of the basics of the data tools as well, because these are kind of important. I click on data and I have sort and filtering options here as well. And then I have these data tools options. Data tools is really useful because it allows you to interact with the data that's inside of your cells in unique ways. The most important two options here, though, that I think are text to columns, which we're going to go through first. It splits columns or cells that you have selected into multiple cells, and it just makes data easier to deal with. Let's say I wanted to split up the information here in this data business column, and I wanted to, say, separate the month, the day, and the year information. Well, what I could do is I could insert some columns over here, highlight the column that I wanted to split up, and then hit text columns. It has two different options here. It has delimited and it has fixed width. Delimited uses characters in the actual text to split these up, and fixed width uses a fixed, position of the data to split that up. We're going to go with fixed width first, just to show you what I mean. And then we're going to do delimited, which is the way that I personally prefer to split up cells. Fixed width, however, is good if you're trying to split up chunks of text that are pretty evenly spaced. What you do is you hit fixed width and hit next, and then you get this sort of ruler up top here in a data preview. What you do is you just click on the different length through, and it actually cuts up the data based on where you click on it. If you want to remove one once you click it, you will select that option. I like to just move it out to the end before I do this, and double click it, like so, to remove that split. Let's go ahead and split it here at about 5 characters in, just to show you what I mean. I can hit next as well. And what this does is it lets me select the formatting of the columns that I'm splitting. So I can say, well, this is just going to be text. Then I'd click on the next column I'm creating and say, well, I want this to format as, let's say, a date. And then I can hit finish. Or if I hit back, I have it all selected. I can just leave it normally and hit finish as well. Now there's already data here. Do you want to replace it? Notice will pop up. And what that means is as we're splitting cells, it is going to overwrite whatever is to the right of the column that we're splitting. The reason that it gives you this warning, at least even though these are blank cells, is because of these headers having borders right up here. If the cells are completely blank and there's absolutely no data in the way of it, it's not going to give you this notice. But if you have any sort of formatting or any sort of weird stuff in the cell at all, then it's going to tell you that there's already data there. Because I inserted enough columns and I know it's splitting it into 2, I know I'm not overwriting anything. So I'm going to hit OK. And as you can see, it applied that formatting from our next over option. I have the split information up here, and every 5 characters in, you can see it's actually applied that split. And our column over here converted those little 4-digit numbers that we had from that split into a date. I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo that. And I'm going to show you the other way to split columns, which I think is a little bit better. I'm going to go to Text to Columns, and then hit Delimited, and hit Next. What this will do is instead of splitting it based off of the number of characters in a cell, it's going to split off of the actual characters themselves. As you can see, there are options here for tabs, semicolons, commas, or spaces. And those are just the traditional options. But what I like to do is actually click Other and then specify how I want that data split. I'm going to hit Other and then put a / in there. And as you can see, now it's creating 3 columns of data. I'll have the month, the day, and the year. I can hit Next and then format that information. So let's say I want it to read as just general stuff here. Date up here. Now it's going to automatically select a 3-digit one for date, which is why I tend to prefer to format everything as text or general when I do splits like this. But if you wanted to get a little bit more specific, you could click on that column and hit Advanced. And it'll actually bring up some more advanced separation tools as well. It's just going to be advanced things to recognize numbers versus text. If you have general selected, if I select text and hit Advanced, it's going to give me the same menu though. So it's not really that useful. I like to leave everything as general or text because of that. And then I have the year in our 3rd column. If I hit Finish, it's going to give me that notice again because of our borders. and I hit OK. Now what it's done is it's formatted everything as a date. And the reason that it's doing that is because this original column was already formatted as a date. It saved that formatting even though we told it to just save it as general information. If I highlight that range of data, however, hit our home, and change those cells back to a general format, my numbers are there. I can then just title this month, day, and year. And now I have my original date split into 3 columns. That's really useful for sorting information is what I find, but I just like using that to actually interact with data tools. It's really helpful if you have like a long string of numbers and you just really need the last part of it to sort information. You can get that out separately that way, and sorting will ignore all of the front stuff because it's in a different column. I'm going to Control Z back through this to get back to the date of birth column. And then I'm going to delete those columns we inserted as well. The reason I'm doing this is just to preserve this table for our next presentation for some other formulas that we're going to enter. Additionally, you may want to look at the View tab up here. The reason that I like using the View options here is because it lets us actually do freeze panes. Now, freeze panes is a little bit difficult to interact with, so I'd recommend if you're a new user, only clicking freeze top row. When you do that, it freezes the top row of the cell in position. So now if I scroll through the data, my headers stay where they are. And that way I can just sort of interact with all of these cells down here while preserving the actual header information as part of my view. It's really useful if you're just dealing with a lot of numbers in a spreadsheet and you're not really sure what to do with it. To undo that, you just stay on the View tab, go to Freeze Panes, and the top option is Unfreeze Panes. Those are kind of the most basic menu interactions, and there's a lot to this menu. So that's going to be the focus of our next webinar. If you're really interested in getting the most out of these, I'd recommend watching that one. But there are 1 or 2 other things to mention over here in File. Now, File is how you save documents, and I think you should be able to see this part, but if you can't, just let me know in the chat. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Info tab to see general information about my workbook. This would be information like how the workbook's protected. If you wanted to convert that file into a different layout, you could automatically click it here. You can actually inspect the workbook in a little more detail as well, but that's really more for advanced use cases. Or you could change it to a web-based version of Excel. We covered this in my last Tech Tuesday, which actually wasn't live, unfortunately. But basically, Excel has some different menu options that you can go through online as well. So if you have a version of Excel that has an online viewer, you can view it in that version of it this way. But if you have a desktop version, I just recommend sticking to it. If you have some issues with a workbook and it closes suddenly on you too, and you wanted to reopen that, you could go to Info and Manage Workbook to recover a previous saved version of it. Excel automatically saves information as you go through it, just for basic data recovery. So if you've lost a document, that's the place to check. It doesn't always do it, and you do lose some data every time if you're gonna revert it that way, but it's useful as a backup. Additionally, if you wanted to just quickly save the document, you can go to Save on that icon. It automatically saves it. I'm going to hit Cancel Out because I don't really want to save this. But if you wanted to get into some more advanced options, you can click Save As. The reason I'm mentioning this is just to get into kind of the file types that Excel interacts with, because it is actually kind of important. I'm just going to hit the Browse option. And what that does is it opens up a file explorer that shows us where this is saved right now. I have this workbook titled Excel Sample Workbook saved in an Excel 97 to 2003 workbook format. What that is just a very lightweight format that preserves some general formatting of cells, sets data as data, and then keeps it where it is. A lot of times from carriers, however, you'll get things in what's called CSV format. And what that is it's comma-separated values. I'm just going to go ahead and save this document as Excel Sample Workbook CSV to sort of show you what that does. Now, it gives you this little error here, and it says the selected file type does not support workbooks that contain multiple sheets. And I'm going to hit OK. It also gives me this error up here that says there's possible data loss, and that is correct. I'm going to exit out of this and then exit out of the sheet. And I'm going to save my changes as well. Here's a CSV. And now I'm closed. But if I look at this menu option here, I now have two options. I have the comma-separated value type for Excel, and I have the 97 to 2003 type. I'm going to go ahead and open up the comma-separated value option. As you can see, we've lost some spreadsheets. All of those notes over here are now gone in the different tabs. I had 4 separate tabs down here in Excel, but now I only have the one. And the interesting part, to me at least, is that it did actually preserve these right up in here. If you open up a text CSV in Excel, you'll just see a bunch of values separated by columns, or commas, sorry, in column A. But because we had this kind of edited in Excel previously, just saved the initial sheet, separated all the values there, and we're good. It used the sheet that I actually had selected when I saved it as a CSV. Now, the good news, though, is if you save it as a different file type, let's say as standard Excel, which is that XLSX type, and I open it up, then you'll preserve all of your different data. I'm just using CSVs as a sample, but generally what you'll want to do if you're saving information in a spreadsheet is keep either an XLS, which is that 97 to 2003 workbook, or just use the Excel workbook format. And that changes it to an XLSX type. XLSX is the new format that you use to save documents in Excel, and it's wonderful. If you do anything fancy like have colors or different formats in your spreadsheets, save things as this. A lot of older kind of databases import from XLSX or SLSX or XLS, sorry, file types, which are that 97 to 03, which is why I have this distributed document saved as that. But it's just something to be aware of when you're saving workbooks. So when you do a lot of work in a spreadsheet and you really don't want to lose data, make sure you save it as either this 97 to 2003 option, or it's just a standard Excel workbook. I'm going to also go ahead and delete that comma-separated value file as well. Now, this does leave a little bit of time for us to go over some formula information. And formulas are probably the most powerful thing in Excel that you can do as a basic user. Before I do that, though, it is kind of advanced and a little complicated. So I want to answer some questions here first. Let's look here with this first question from Kathy. I want to sort by date of birth, but with the entire row. So what I think you're talking about is sorting by like a specific row. I might need a little more clarification on that. But the sort and filter option through the menu is probably going to be the easiest way. What you're going to do is you're just going to click on the top, go to sort and filter, and add a custom sort. Make sure you have the expanded selection selected, and it'll select all of the rows. If you're trying to get it like you just want to sort one column by information and leave the rest of the data, what you do is you highlight just the column you want to sort, go back into the sort and filter, hit custom sort, and hit continue with current selection. What that does is it sorts specifically that selection that you had. So in this case, I selected column M. So if I sort by month paid now and hit OK, and sort anything that looks like a number as a number, well, that didn't really help a lot, but oh, I see. So it sorted all of this information here without regard to the rest of the data. So what it did is it sorted everything in here as a number, but it just did this column. So all of that lineup that we had with like Samantha over here and this line for Craig Kasmerick, all of that information was lost. If I hit Control-Z to undo it, it didn't really help much because I think it was already kind of pre-sorted. Let's use a different one to kind of help. Let's do date of birth for that. So we're going to format these as short dates, sort and filter, custom sort with current selection, date of birth A to Z, sort anything that looks like a number as a number. And now that probably shows a little bit of a more evident change. So that's how you would just sort that entire row without regard to any of the rest of the data. But that's why I recommend just selecting your full range of data before you do any sorts. So now I just hit custom sort, and now I can sort and filter by date of birth. Hit OK. And that sorted all of my rows by this date of birth column here, column H. One of the other questions that I've got here is how to expand like the selection of a cell automatically. And the way you would do that is just by, let's condense this column G, or actually all the cells because they were all selected. If I wanted to automatically extend this cell all the way out to show all of the data, click on the column and just double click on it. And that will expand that entire column to show that entire range of information. If I have wrap text on as well, it'll automatically wrap that text and sort of lengthen those cells to display it. Or if, let's say, I had a bunch of information in one cell here, like let's just add in some names or letters into that top one and undo the wrap. It actually undid what we were doing. Strange. Let me look through the rest of this. I thought this was the one we were editing. It did. Well, that's very strange. Normally what Excel will do with this is it will automatically lengthen that to display the data, like what I just did there. Excel can be a little bit glitchy about this on rows, just because it doesn't normally deal with that kind of wrapped up information. But that would be how you automatically extend the rows and columns. And then to interact with that cell more directly, I clicked on that and hit enter to move down. But as you can see, when I selected it and hit enter, it moved down below. This is more of a, not necessarily advanced, but just weird use case. If you wanted to add lists of information like below this in the same cell, you would hold the Alt key on your keyboard and hit enter to sort of extend this down as well. And I'm gonna click off. And as you can see, that undid it. If I just want this to stay minimized or extend it, I click on this little arrow up here. And I can actually do the same thing for the ribbon to collapse it. Then if I wanted to put it back, I would select an option in the ribbon, hit that little pin icon there as well. I'm going to re-lengthen all of this information. And before I get into formulas, one more time, if anyone has any other questions, please go ahead. We're going to go through formulas kind of briefly because we only have about 15 minutes, but it's really incredibly useful and probably the most powerful part of Excel. So I thought I would mention it. Formulas are actually accessible via this formula option up here in the menu. It kind of sorts these functions as well into recently used, financial functions, logical functions, etc. Most Excel users will just really want to use this auto sum feature or this recently used feature. But the reason it's useful is, let's say I have this entire column selected and I want to very quickly in this cell put a summation of all of what was above. What I can do is I click on the cell I want to put the formula into, go to formulas, and click on this little drop down here. This auto sum gives me some general number functions. And if I hover over the option, it'll actually kind of show me what the formula does, and then show me what in text that formula is supposed to do. If I have like an average that I want to get from these cells, I hover over it. It's not actually showing me that. And the reason that it's doing that is because it only shows it for the top one that's like listed in the entire row, if you're entering them this way. I'm just going to click on sum. And if you are doing this with, a general formula, it'll automatically highlight the range of cells that are either above or to the left of the cell you had selected. In this case, I can tell by this little center part of the formula, which is N2 colon N601, that it is using the sum function given by this name on cells N2 to N601. And if I hit enter, once hitting that, I just very quickly have a sum of that row. The other option is to select, let's say, cell 0602, and just click on that auto sum function and hit enter. And that uses the formula that popped up there. Alternatively, I have a bunch of other functions as well, as you can see just by clicking on the financial option. If I hover through them real quick, it shows you a brief description of what they do. That's kind of the most basic way to interact with them. The other way is to do this insert function option. What that does is it brings up a function wizard, and it actually just sort of shows you kind of what I just said in a different way. I have the cell that I have selected here with the equal sign, and then I can use this menu to search for a function that I want. Let's go and use that sum one again. What I do is I'm going to go to all, and then I'm going to type the name of that function up here in this bar. I'm going to type sum because the name of the function is sum, and then I'm going to hit go. And as you can see, it's sorted and looked for any function that had the word sum in its description or in the name of it. It has this line st as well. That's kind of a more advanced one. It pulled sum if because it's a sum function based on certain criteria. And it brought up a lot of other more advanced functions as well. For now, let's just use sum. I hit OK here. And what it does is it gives me a more advanced view of the sum function. This more advanced view also has a little sort of sample of what these numbers in here actually mean for the function, along with additional inputs for the function listed down below. This is really useful if you want to sum a group of cells, but not the entire group of cells, like above or below it or to the left or right. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hit this little up arrow key on this option here. If I hit that, it gives me a box that says function arguments, and all I'm going to do is select a range of cells. Let's say I want to sum cell 07 to cell 010. I just keep highlighting until it says 07 to 010, and then I hit that little drop down there as well. And now I'm back to the same menu I had. Then, if you just keep clicking through, it'll give you the rest of the arguments for the function. Some of these functions have a lot of different arguments that can be input, some of them don't. And I apologize for using this jargon. There's not really much of a better way to put it, so I apologize if there's any confusion. If I click on that option there, though, I can now select another range of cells to add together. In this case, I've selected N10 to N26. And I can keep doing this for every single set of cells that I want to add together. Let's say I also wanted to add in some of these numbers. I'm just going to select A4 to A13. Hit that drop down again. Once I have all the different ranges of cells that I want to add together selected, I'm going to hit OK. And it gives me the sum of these ranges that are listed up here of cells in this box. It'll give you a little notice here for troubleshooting, which you normally won't really need. But that's how you would sum together a bunch of really different cells very quickly. There are a ton of different functions and a lot of syntax to learn as well for this. So it can sometimes be a little daunting, but it is very powerful. If you're interested in learning a lot more about formulas, I'd recommend reviewing this formulas and syntax general notes option here. What this does is it gives you a list of my favorite most common functions, as well as the ways you type in the code for them, and a bunch of other ways you can use them, including nesting. Nesting is a much more advanced use case, which we're not going to cover in today's webinar. But it's an option that I thought most users should be aware of, even if they don't normally know about it. The reason that I mention that is because there's another way to input a function into this cell. We're going to stick with the sum function for now. Let's say I wanted to really quickly sum up all of the cells above 0602 again. What I would do is I type equals, and then the name of the function, which is sum, and then a open parenthesis. Now, what I'm doing is I'm hovering over the cell, and it gives me a bunch of different inputs. In this case, it's asking for the cell references that I mentioned earlier in our last option. If I just hit sum, and then say 02, use my little colon there to tell it that I'm trying to reference a range of cells, and then type 0599, it'll highlight automatically. See this little blue box up here? That's telling me it's summing all of this range of data from cell 02 to 0599. If I then wanted to include a different one, let's say I wanted to do column N as well, I can delete this O here and type N. And now it has all of the cells in range N2 to O5999 selected. But for now, let's stick to O. Then I would close the parenthesis of the function and hit enter. And that quickly added that all together as well. If you get really, really familiar with functions, this is the way that I'd recommend entering them because it's much faster than using any sort of menu or wizard. But that's, again, more of an advanced use case, just something I want everyone to be aware of. The reason is because I can do things like that summation incredibly quickly. I'm going to do a summation as well, but let's say I wanted to do multiple ranges of cells this time. We'll do equal sum in our parenthesis. And then let's say I wanted to do N2 to N5, N2 colon N5. And I also wanted to include cell range 0598 to 0601. I just hit a comma and then 0608, or I apologize, 0596 0601. Sorry. Close it off and then hit enter. Oh, I see. I used a 0 instead of an O there. I apologize. So what it does is it tells me there's an error in my formula. I just go back and correct it by inputting the letter O. And now it summed those cell ranges. Just to show you real quick what I did there visually. This red box here shows me the cells that I have selected in red. And then all the way at the top of the sheet, it has those other cells that I had selected as well. Now, this is really useful if you already know where everything is located and you just want to get a cell summation really quick. You could also use either of the other options that I showed you as well, if you're trying to get the basics of how to interact using formulas. Now, there are a lot of other things you can do with this as well. You can use logical functions to say, like, if this cell says this, export this. If this cell says another thing, export something different. For instance, equals if this cell equals CRAIG. I'm going to tell it to put a 1. And if it doesn't, then I'm going to tell it to put a 0. And what I'm going to do then is extend this formula. Now, what that means is I'm just dragging that formula all the way down. I did that by clicking on the cell, highlighting this corner here until my cursor became a plus sign, and then dragging it. And what that did is it extended that formula through several rows. I also extended it up just to show you the other option. And so now I have 0s and 1s, and all of my 1s say 1 if it says Craig as a first name. That can be extremely useful if you're just trying to get a general sense of, let's say, how many Craigs there are in a data set. I could use that function, extend it through the entire column, and then just highlight that column. Down in the bottom right, it'll show me a sum of all of those. So now I know very quickly there are 48 Craigs in this list. And then I'm going to delete that function. One thing to be aware of, though, if you're extending functions like this, let's just go ahead and get a quick sum of this column as an example, is if you're dragging things down or dragging things to the left, those references will change as well. As you can see in this cell, it says 02 to 0601. If I go to the one next to it that I dragged out, it then says P2 to P601. And the one after that is Q2 to Q601. If I go down the line, it says 03 to 0602, 04 to 0603, 05 to 0604. What I'm getting at is if you drag these formulas, it'll change the references in here. The way you can get that to not change is by inserting $signs before either the column letter or the column number, as I did with that option there. Now, if I drag this function to the right, you can see the number there isn't changing, but what I want you to look at is this detail up here in your sum box. I'm gonna zoom, well, I can't really zoom in on that section, unfortunately, but it says up here, O2 to P601 now. This one says O2 to Q601. This one then says O2 to R601. So what that $sign did is it made sure that that letter up there did not change as well. And the same thing could be said of the numbers in this one. For 3, let's say I just keep extending this one down now. As you can see, those numbers updated. If I look down, see the number on the right is changing as I scroll through, but the number that had the $sign in front of it didn't. That's what that $sign does. It just locks values. So it's not something that you're probably going to need to think of every day, But if you're trying to very quickly move formulas around, just make sure you have $signs before the values that you know you don't want to change. And that concludes our presentation, actually, at least the part of it I had planned. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in. I'm going to be here for another 5 minutes. I know we went a little bit over, but just so you know, this will also be available online. I'm going to make sure this is uploaded by Friday, probably. And what that does is that just makes sure that you have access to this. You have access to all of our recordings online on our website. You would just go to www.crnstone.com, then go to additional information, webinars. Actually, I'll go ahead and show you right now. Once my internet browser likes to load up. Sorry, this computer can be a bit slow. But it's www.crnstone.com for our website. And then once it loads, you would go to the Resource Center, Webinar Series. And then you can click on or scroll down and select the webinar series you want to look at, like Tech Tuesday. And it'll show you some of our recent webinars as well. So this is where you would access the recording of this once it's uploaded. Once again, if you have any questions, I am available via email, or you can type them in here now. And I'm also available on phone at 513-487-5390. The email address as well is tlevine@crnstone.com, and I'm happy to answer any questions that way. Other than that, I'm here for another few minutes, so if you have any other questions, please let me know. And thank you for attending.